When Keanu Reeves appears on Dr. Phil's talk show, the audience expects another one of his inspiring interviews. But Dr. Phil isn't interested in inspiration. He wants to provoke, challenge, and expose the actor's most vulnerable side. Yet, as Keanu takes his seat, something feels off. Dr. Phil holds his cue cards with a sharp smile. What was supposed to be a calm conversation could turn into something much bigger. But what Dr. Phil doesn't know is that in just a few minutes, he would be the one left speechless. What Keanu would say that night would change everything, and no one in the audience would ever forget it. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The studio is packed. The bright stage lights shine intensely, illuminating the set at the center of the vast auditorium. The audience murmurs in anticipation, holding up colorful signs with messages of admiration and gratitude. Among them, some stand out. "Keanu, you are our hero," and "Thank you for being you." The movement of cameras and producers behind the scenes signals that the long-awaited moment is about to happen. A silent countdown flashes on the monitors scattered across the set. The glow of the spotlights dances against the backdrop curtain, creating a cinematic aura for the unfolding scene. Then he appears. Keanu Reeves walks across the stage with calm, measured steps. His presence carries a unique magnetism, a simplicity that sets him apart from the typical Hollywood stars. He wears a plain black shirt, a modest blazer, and well-worn jeans, reflecting his unpretentious personality. His dark hair falls slightly over his shoulders, and a soft smile lingers on his lips. The audience erupts in applause. Some call out his name, while others simply watch in admiration. There is something about him that soothes yet deeply moves those around him. Keanu raises a hand in a modest gesture of thanks before settling into the central chair on the stage, adjusting himself with ease. The atmosphere hums with a mix of excitement and reverence. On the other side of the table, sitting with rigid posture, is Dr. Phil. He is a renowned television personality, famous for his no-nonsense interviews and direct approach. His show is known for exposing vulnerabilities, extracting uncomfortable truths, and occasionally dismantling reputations. Dressed in a fitted blazer with his hair perfectly styled, Dr. Phil holds a stack of question cards with a firm grip. His gaze is analytical, almost piercing. His lips curve into a half smile, a blend of professionalism and challenge. He studies Keanu for a few seconds before leaning slightly forward. His voice is firm and controlled as he fires the first question. "Keanu, you have fame, fortune, you could live like a king, yet instead, you take the subway, donate millions, and seem to avoid any kind of luxury. Does that really make a difference in the world?" Silence lingers in the studio for a moment. The audience murmurs. Some frown, uncomfortable with the provocative tone of the question. Others wait anxiously for Keanu's response. He, however, remains unfazed, maintaining his relaxed posture. He reflects for a brief moment, then he lifts his eyes to Dr. Phil and offers a soft smile. "Dr. Phil, have you ever thought about how many people feel invisible every day?" A weight seems to settle over the studio. The audience grows quiet, some expressions shifting, touched by the simplicity and depth of his response. Dr. Phil raises an eyebrow, slightly surprised at how Keanu effortlessly deflected his provocation without losing his composure. But he is not satisfied yet. He flips to the next card, holding it between his fingers, his eyes gleaming with an almost ruthless intent. His trump card is still to come. Leaning in slightly more, he is ready to ask the question that, in his mind, will finally make Keanu lose his balance. He crosses his legs, adjusting his posture with calculated elegance. A slight smile forms at the corners of his lips, but his eyes hold a merciless glint. He casually tosses the next question card onto the table, letting the suspense linger in the air. Then, without hesitation, he fires. "Keanu, you lost your fiancé, your baby, your best friend. Didn't that destroy you? Don't you feel that, in the end, everything is just pain?" The impact of the question is immediate. The audience holds its breath. Some cover their mouths, shocked by the brutal nature of the question. Others frown, visibly uncomfortable with the blunt and insensitive way Dr. Phil approached the subject. Keanu lowers his head slightly. His fingers interlace over his knees, and for a moment, silence stretches across the entire studio. The cameras zoom in on his face. His eyes, which usually hold a serene glow, now reflect something deeper, an ocean of memories, of losses, of pain that cannot be put into words. Dr. Phil watches closely, waiting for a hesitation, a flicker of vulnerability he can exploit. But then Keanu lifts his gaze. He takes a deep breath and in a calm voice responds, "Pain never destroyed me. It taught me. It taught me that nothing is permanent, that every moment matters, and that true love never disappears." The studio remains utterly silent. The eyes of some audience members begin to glisten with unshed tears. A woman in the front row pulls out a tissue and discreetly dabs at her eyes. Even those unfamiliar with his personal story can feel the weight and truth in his words. The camera shifts to Dr. Phil. For the first time, he looks slightly unsettled. The sharp smile fades for a brief moment, replaced by an expression that blends surprise and perhaps a flicker of regret. But Dr. Phil is not one to back down. He straightens his shoulders, masking any hesitation, and slides his fingers over the question cards. His next move is already set, and this time, he aims to strike Keanu where he least expects it. But he won't give up. He still has one final trick up his sleeve, a question designed to expose Keanu's weakness and make him seem irrelevant to Hollywood. The studio still feels the weight of what just happened. The audience is quieter, some still absorbing Keanu's words. But Dr. Phil has no intention of slowing down. He straightens his shoulders, regains his composed smile, and slowly flips through the question cards in his hand as if carefully selecting his next move. But he already knows exactly what he's going to ask. He leans forward slightly, narrowing his eyes like a predator ready to strike. His tone is different now, less aggressive, more calculated, like a carefully laid trap. "Keanu, you're over 50 now. Hollywood doesn't care about actors your age anymore. Don't you fear becoming irrelevant?" The audience reacts instantly. Some whisper in shock, others frown, uncomfortable with the bluntness of the question. Keanu, however, doesn't respond immediately. He gently rubs his fingers together, thoughtful. His gaze drifts for a brief moment, as if traveling somewhere distant, to a place only he knows. Dr. Phil notices the pause and smiles inwardly. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Then Keanu lifts his eyes and looks directly at him. His face is calm, but his expression carries a weight no one expected. "Dr. Phil, have you ever seen a sunset?" The host blinks, caught off guard. The audience also seems puzzled by the unexpected response. Keanu continues, his voice soft but filled with meaning. "A sunset is beautiful, but have you ever heard anyone call it irrelevant just because the night is coming?" The studio erupts into applause. Shouts of support echo through the audience. "Yes! Bravo, Keanu! You're amazing!" Dr. Phil is frozen for a moment. He loses complete control of the interview. His expression shifts. The rehearsed smile fades, replaced by something unreadable, surprise, and perhaps even a flicker of respect. Keanu didn't attack him. He didn't retaliate with aggression. He simply turned the question against him, offering a response so beautiful and undeniable that for a moment, the entire structure of the interview seems to collapse. Dr. Phil takes a deep breath, trying to regain control. He glances at the cards in his hand and realizes he needs a different approach. His plan to unsettle Keanu isn't working as he expected. But there is still a way. If Keanu doesn't fear irrelevance, maybe he can touch on something even deeper. His next move will target Keanu's childhood. Dr. Phil, feeling control slipping from his hands, decides to attack Keanu's past, trying to expose his vulnerability. The studio is still buzzing from Keanu's last response. The audience, which had been divided between applause and murmurs, now looks at him with a newfound layer of respect. Keanu hasn't just answered the questions with calmness, he has turned each provocation into a powerful reflection. But Dr. Phil isn't finished. He can feel control of the interview slipping through his fingers, and it frustrates him. His show isn't known for inspiring moments, it's known for putting celebrities on the spot. He needs to regain his grip on the conversation, so he decides to go deeper. He picks up the next question card, holding it for a few seconds as if weighing his words. But deep down, he already knows exactly what he wants to say. Leaning forward slightly, his voice is firm, but there's a cold edge to it. "Keanu, you grew up without a father. Your mother worked hard to support you. Have you never felt angry about that?" The impact of the question is immediate. The audience shifts uncomfortably. Some frown, realizing that Dr. Phil is trying to poke at an old wound. Keanu, however, doesn't react with surprise. He expected this attack. He takes a deep breath, and instead of looking at Dr. Phil, he gazes off into the distance, as if revisiting memories from a long ago past. After a moment of silence, he offers a small, thoughtful smile. "My father taught me something valuable." Dr. Phil blinks, slightly confused. This wasn't the response he was expecting. Keanu then looks back at him and continues, "He showed me the kind of man I didn't want to become. My mother taught me how to survive." Silence grips the studio. A woman in the audience lets out a quiet sob, unable to hold back her emotions. A few people exchange glances, touched by the simplicity and depth of Keanu's words. For the first time, Dr. Phil hesitates. This interview was supposed to be a power play, with him controlling the rhythm. But Keanu refuses to play by his rules. He doesn't react with anger, nor does he defend himself. Instead, he turns every harsh question into a life lesson. For a brief moment, Dr. Phil doesn't know what to say. He flips through the cards once more, his fingers slowly gliding over the paper. It's becoming clear that his previous strategies aren't working. But there is still one final move. He lifts his eyes to Keanu, and this time, his expression no longer holds the sarcasm it once did. Now there's something different, something darker. If touching on his past wasn't enough, there might be only one thing that can truly shake him, the fear of his own mortality. But he still has one last card to play, a question that will force him to confront his deepest fear. The air in the studio is electric, charged with an unspoken energy that no one can quite describe. The audience is no longer just watching an interview, they are witnessing something else, something deeper. Keanu Reeves has faced every question with an almost meditative calm, turning even the sharpest inquiries into reflections that leave the crowd in silent awe. But Dr. Phil is not finished. His mind races. Every calculated dig, every verbal trap, none of them have fazed him. He adjusts his blazer, slowly pulling back his shoulders. A journalist known for breaking even the most composed guests, he has built his career on digging deeper, pushing boundaries, and exposing vulnerabilities. And right now, sitting across from Keanu, he feels something unfamiliar creeping in. Frustration. Not because Keanu refuses to play his game, but because he keeps changing it altogether. His previous tactics had aimed to expose him, to strip away the mystique surrounding his kindness, his humility. But instead, Keanu has left him with more questions than answers. This is his last chance. He needs to take control. This time, there's no smirk, no performative charm. He leans forward just slightly. The movement is calculated, deliberate. His voice, when it comes, is quieter than before, but there's something else woven into it, something colder. "Keanu, don't you feel fear?" The words hang between them, suspended in the still air. Time waits for no one. Have you ever thought about what will happen when your time comes? A collective hush falls over the studio. This is different. This is no longer about Hollywood success or public perception. This isn't about box office numbers, acting careers, or relevancy. This is about something no one can escape. Keanu tilts his head slightly. He does not answer right away. He doesn't laugh it off. He doesn't deflect. Instead, he breathes in deeply, his expression unreadable. For the first time in the interview, the silence stretches. Dr. Phil holds his breath. The audience leans forward. Then, finally, Keanu speaks. "Dr. Phil, do you know the difference between fear and faith?" Dr. Phil blinks. For the first time, he's caught off guard. He presses his lips together. He had expected resistance. He had expected defensiveness. He had even expected vague, media-trained responses. He had not expected this. For the first time since the interview began, he does not have a quick rebuttal. His gaze lowers to the question cards in his hands. He flips through them, looking for something, anything, that might help him regain control. But suddenly, the words on the cards feel empty. Everything he had meticulously planned for, the angles, the traps, the psychological warfare of journalism, none of it seems relevant anymore. Because this isn't a battle. Keanu has taken his carefully constructed chessboard and turned it into something else entirely. Something bigger. Something he wasn't prepared for. He thought he was conducting an interview. Instead, Keanu had turned it into a conversation about life itself. And then, As he stares at his notes, he realizes something. There is one last question he needs to ask, something deeper, something final. He lifts his gaze, and when he speaks again, his voice is barely above a whisper. And what if no one remembers you when you're gone? The weight of the question hits the air like a stone sinking into deep water. The audience barely breathes. For the first time in the entire segment, Keanu Reeves does not immediately answer. The air in the studio feels heavier now. Dr. Phil's last question, delivered almost as a whisper, lingers in the silence. And what if no one remembers you when you're gone? It is the kind of question designed to unravel a person, to expose a hidden fear, to force them to face their own insignificance. But Keanu does not flinch. Instead, he smiles softly. It's not a smirk, nor is it the rehearsed smile of a Hollywood star. It's something else, something deeper. He takes a breath, and when he speaks, his voice is as steady as ever. The question isn't what they will remember about me. He pauses for just a second, letting the words settle. The question is, what will they remember about you? A visible shift ripples through the audience. Some people gasp softly, others sit back, stunned by the unexpected turn. A few exchange glances, as if realizing that for the first time, Dr. Phil is the one on the receiving end of the question. The camera zooms in on his face. Dr. Phil, the man who had built a career tearing down public figures, suddenly looks lost. His lips part slightly, but he doesn't speak. His fingers tighten around the cue cards in his lap. Yet he doesn't glance down at them. Because for the first time in this interview, perhaps for the first time in a long time, he has no prepared answer. The silence stretches. And then, something no one expects happens. A single tear slips down Dr. Phil's cheek. He doesn't wipe it away. The camera catches it, the way his throat moves as he swallows, the way his breathing shifts, as if something heavy has just settled inside him. Keanu watches him, not with triumph, not with smugness, but with quiet understanding. He stands. The studio is quieter now. The applause has faded. The excitement of the audience replaced by something more contemplative. People sit still, some wiping away lingering tears, others lost in thought. The screen fades to black. And then, a final message appears. Life is not about how long we live, but about the impact we leave behind. Soft music plays in the background, gentle and reflective. The video comes to an end. If this story touched you, like, comment, and share.
In case you did not watch my last story, I will leave it here for you. Happy watching. On a lonely highway in the Nevada desert, Keanu Reeves stopped at a small gas station to refuel his motorcycle and grab a coffee. It was a place forgotten by time, where dust blended with the scent of old gasoline. A teen girl behind the counter seemed like just another exhausted figure at the end of a long day, but something in her eyes told a different story. It wasn't just the surprise of seeing that she was just a child, no older than 12. It was the invisible tension hanging in the air, the way her hands trembled as she handed back the change, the watchful eyes of the man keeping a close eye on her. When Keanu picked up the receipt and absent-mindedly turned it over, his body tensed. The handwritten words made his blood run cold. You won't believe how this story ends. It will keep you on edge from start to finish. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The road cut through the desert like a forgotten scar. The road cut through the desert like a forgotten scar. The heat made the asphalt shimmer under the setting sun, and Keanu felt the warm wind against his face as he rode his motorcycle. He liked empty roads, but this stretch of Nevada desert felt too empty. When he saw the only gas station for miles, he decided to stop. The flickering neon sign read Open 24H, though some letters were burned out, giving the place a rundown feel. He slowed down, parking next to the only working pump. The door to the mini-mart creaked open, and a young girl stepped out. Keanu immediately noticed something different. She was far too young to be out here alone. She was thin, her oversized uniform hanging loosely on her small frame. Her eyes were sunken, dark circles etched deep, and her shoulders seemed permanently hunched. She avoided making eye contact. "Good evening, sir. Fill up?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Keanu nodded. "Full tank, please." She started fueling, but her hands were slightly trembling. Keanu didn't like that. Something felt off. The mini-mart door swung open again. A man stepped out. Matt. Tall, broad-shouldered, hard-faced. He said nothing, he just stood in the doorway watching. But Keanu noticed how the girl immediately dropped her gaze when he appeared. Matt never took his eyes off her. When the girl fumbled slightly with the gas nozzle, Matt's expression hardened. "You're taking too damn long." His voice was cold, sharp. The girl hurried immediately without looking up. Keanu saw that, and he didn't like it. After fueling up, Keanu decided to step into the mini-mart. The inside was cluttered and dimly lit, with shelves filled with expired products. The air smelled of stale coffee. The girl stood behind the counter, wearing the same vacant expression as before. Matt remained near the door, watching everything. "Just a coffee, please," Keanu said. She moved quickly, but her hands shook slightly, causing a few drops to spill. Matt let out an exaggerated sigh. Jesus, can't even hold a damn cup right. She didn't respond, just grabbed a cloth and wiped up the spill as fast as possible. Keanu took his coffee, but something about that moment disturbed him deeply. When Keanu handed over his money, the girl hesitated for a split second before giving him his change. She didn't look him in the eye, but when their hands briefly touched, Keanu felt the faintest squeeze of her fingers. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, like she was trying to say something without words. Then, in a swift motion, she slid the receipt into his hand. Keanu took it without reacting. The girl immediately pulled back. Matt was still watching, and he looked suspicious. Outside, Keanu took a sip of his coffee as he walked to his bike. The desert was too quiet. He glanced at the receipt before stuffing it into his pocket, but as he folded it, he saw something handwritten on the back. "Help. Please, don't let him see this." Keanu's heart beat harder. He lifted his gaze and discreetly looked back at the mini-mart. The girl was inside now, standing behind the counter, her hands resting over her small frame. And then he noticed something even stranger. Matt was locking the door, slowly turning the key like he was sealing the place. Keanu felt his pulse quicken. He could simply ride away. But now he knew something was very wrong. The girl wasn't just trapped in this gas station. She was a prisoner, and Matt wasn't letting her go. Keanu couldn't just leave. He immediately lifted his eyes. Inside, she stood behind the counter, her hands instinctively placed over herself, the movement subtle, protective. And then for just a second she looked at him, but it was enough. That look didn't just ask for help, it begged. Keanu felt tension rise in his chest, and then the door to the mini-mart clicked audibly. He turned his head just in time to see Matt locking the door, sealing the place. The girl wasn't just trapped here, she was a hostage, and Matt wasn't letting her leave. This wasn't just coincidence. It was control, and Keanu couldn't just leave. He switched off his engine slowly, pretending to check something on his dashboard. But in reality, his eyes were analyzing everything around him. And now, he saw clearly. This place wasn't just some rundown gas station. It was a prison hiding in plain sight. He started noticing alarming details. Windows covered with newspapers blocking any view from outside. Only one working security camera pointed at the cash register, ignoring the rest of the store. The gas tank was never completely full. This place wasn't running like a real business. It was just a front, and the girl was part of it. He needed to stay calm. He couldn't just barge in and take her. If Matt had been controlling her this long, he wouldn't hesitate to take things further. Keanu moved to the side of the building, pretending to check his bike. And then, he heard it. A muffled noise, like something being knocked over. And a moment later, a short, sharp scream. The girl. The decision was made in that instant. Keanu wasn't leaving without her. He heard the muffled noise again, followed by the short scream, forcing him to take immediate action. He didn't hesitate. He moved quickly to the side of the mini-mart, testing the side door handle. Unlocked. That was strange. If Matt was so controlling, why leave a side entrance unsecured? Maybe he never expected anyone to have the guts to come in. Keanu pushed the door open slowly, slipping inside without making a sound. The smell hit him first. Old oil, dust, a place that should have been clean for customers but was clearly neglected. This didn't feel like a legitimate business. It was something else, and now Keanu needed to figure out what. The shelves were messy, as if no one really cared about organization. The products were expired, some by months. That meant the gas station wasn't really there to sell gas and groceries. It was just a cover for something bigger. As Keanu moved past the shelves, he heard something, a noise coming from a slightly open door in the back. He stopped, holding his breath. He stepped closer and peeked inside. That's when he saw it. The girl. She was sitting on a dirty mattress, a light chain around her ankle. Her eyes widened when she saw Keanu, but before she could say anything, she raised a finger to her lips. Silence. Keanu immediately understood. She couldn't call for help. She wasn't just an employee. She was a prisoner. Keanu clenched his fists slowly. Matt wasn't just controlling her. He had stolen her identity, her documents, her freedom. And from the way she trembled, he had hurt her before. Keanu moved closer, slowly. The girl spoke fast and low. Please, you have to leave. He'll be back soon. Keanu looked at the chain on her ankle. Does he always keep you like this? She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. He took me months ago. I tried to run, but she looked down at her arms. Bruises. Keanu felt a weight in his chest. This girl wasn't just a victim of abuse. She was being held against her will. And Matt didn't seem like the kind of man who would let this go easily. Keanu reached into his pocket, pulling out a small knife. Stay quiet. He crouched down, starting to cut through the chain. Then, heavy footsteps behind him. Keanu knew instantly. Before he could turn around, Matt's voice echoed through the room. What the hell do you think you're doing? Keanu stood up slowly. Matt was standing in the doorway, gripping something at his waist, a hunting knife. He was smiling, a cold, cruel smile. You shouldn't have gotten involved. He didn't have time to finish unlocking the girl's chain. What the hell do you think you're doing? Keanu slowly rose to his feet, preparing for the inevitable. Matt stood in the doorway, blocking the exit, gripping a hunting knife. His face didn't show rage. It showed control. That meant only one thing. He had done this before, and worse, he believed he could do it again. Matt let out a slow, casual laugh, adjusting his grip on the knife. Did you really think you could just walk into my store and walk out like nothing happened? Keanu didn't answer. He knew what Matt wanted. A reaction. He wanted to see fear. He wanted Keanu to play his game. But Keanu didn't play games. He stood his ground, waiting. Matt continued, Let me guess, you think you're saving her, right? He glanced at the girl and chuckled. Because so far she hasn't said a damn word. The girl held her breath, frozen. Keanu could feel her eyes on him. She trusted him, but at the same time she feared what Matt might do. Matt stepped closer. The knife caught the dim light, glinting like a warning. I've seen guys like you before, meddling where they don't belong, thinking they're some kind of hero. But in the end, he tilted the blade toward Keanu. They walk out of here in worse shape than when they came in. Keanu still didn't react because he was waiting for something, the sound of sirens. But it wasn't time yet. He needed to stall Matt a little longer. Matt turned to the girl. Tell him, do you want to leave with this guy? She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the knife. Matt sighed, shaking his head. See, she doesn't want to go. Keanu noticed the confidence in Matt's voice. He wasn't in a rush. That meant Matt thought he had complete control over the situation, and that meant he wasn't prepared to lose. Keanu could use that against him. He relaxed his body, exhaling slowly. Okay. Matt narrowed his eyes. What? Keanu took a small step back, opening his hands. If you say she wants to stay, then I'll leave. Matt hesitated. This wasn't what he expected. That's right, Keanu continued, taking another step back. Looks like I wasted my time here. Matt relaxed, and in that moment, Keanu moved. With a sudden burst of speed, Keanu grabbed the nearest chair and shoved it into Matt. Matt stumbled backward. It was enough. Keanu lunged, striking Matt's arm, knocking the knife away. Matt tried to recover. He swung at Keanu, landing a glancing punch to his face. But Keanu was ready. He dodged and brought Matt down with a precise strike. Matt hit the floor hard, gasping for air. Keanu grabbed the knife from the floor. He looked at the girl. "Grab the keys and get out of here." She hesitated, still shaking. But then Matt laughed. Even after everything, he still thought he was in control. "You think this is over?" Keanu didn't respond. He simply glanced at his watch. 30 seconds left. Matt noticed the look on Keanu's face, and then, outside, sirens. Matt froze. Keanu exhaled slowly. "I called the cops the second I heard her scream." Matt tried to move. He knew he couldn't afford to be caught, but Keanu held him down. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed outside. The girl began to cry, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was relief. Matt glared at Keanu with hatred. "You ruined everything." Keanu held his gaze firm. "You ruined yourself." The red and blue lights from the police cars flashed against the cracked asphalt of the gas station. Officers stepped out of their vehicles, weapons drawn, prepared for anything. Keanu raised his hands, making it clear the threat had already been neutralized. Matt lay on the ground, his breath heavy, his eyes filled with hatred. As the officers approached him, he didn't fight back. He knew he had lost. 2 officers yanked him to his feet, swiftly handcuffing him, while another turned to the girl. She was sitting on the ground, hugging her knees, her whole body still shaking. "Miss, are you injured?" One officer asked, his voice calm but firm. She didn't answer at first. She just shook her head as if she didn't even know how to start processing everything. Keanu, still standing nearby, noticed how pale she looked. Her hands, still cradling, her small body trembled slightly. Keanu had seen trauma before. This wasn't just exhaustion. It was the weight of everything she had endured. He crouched beside the girl, meeting her gaze. For a moment, she just stared at him. "It's over." His voice was calm, reassuring. Her lips quivered as if trying to say something, but no words came out. She slowly turned to look at Matt. Even handcuffed, he was still trying to intimidate her. His stare was dark, burning with unspoken threats. But this time, she didn't look away. For the first time, he no longer had power over her. She inhaled deeply, the kind of breath someone takes when they've been holding it in for far too long. The officers led Matt toward one of the patrol cars, his boots scraping against the pavement as they pushed him forward. She watched in silence. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end. It never was. "You don't have to know right now." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can be normal again." After a few minutes, an officer handed the girl a bottle of water. She accepted it, but her hands were still trembling. Keanu noticed. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to." She looked at him. She wanted to talk, because Keanu was the first person to really see what was happening. She took a deep breath, and then she started. "I'm from Kansas." Keanu stayed silent, just listening. "My mom died when I was 7. My dad never recovered." She frowned, as if recalling painful memories. "He started drinking, and when he drank, he changed." Her fingers gripped the water bottle tightly. "By the time I was 11, I knew I had to leave. I spent years trying to figure out how." She let out a weak laugh. "When I turned 12, I took everything I had and bought a bus ticket to Las Vegas. I thought I'd get a job. I thought things would get better." Her laugh faded, quickly. "I was so naive." She hesitated. This part was harder to say. "I made some bad choices." Keanu didn't react, just listened. "I met people who acted like they wanted to help, but they didn't." Her breathing hitched slightly. "I found myself in the streets, homeless." Keanu clenched his jaw but kept his expression neutral. "You were left alone." She nodded. "No money, no place to stay, no one to turn to." Her hands instinctively gripped her arms, as if protecting herself. "That's when Matt found me." She turned toward the gas station, as if staring at a ghost. "He saw me at a diner, said I looked tired, that he could help me." Keanu already knew where this was going, but he let her finish. "At first, I believed him." She let out a shaky breath. "But then, he took my ID." She paused, swallowing hard. "That same night, He locked the door for the first time. Silence. Then, she looked down at her hands. I don't know what to do. Keanu followed her gaze. You don't have to know right now. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know if I can be normal again. Keanu's tone was steady. That's your decision, no one else's. Her eyes blinked, glossy with unshed tears. For the first time, someone wasn't telling her what she should do. She finally had a choice. Hours later, Keanu stood outside the police station. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the quiet streets. The girl stepped out of the front doors, now wearing clean clothes provided by the officers. She looked tired, but for the first time, she looked free. She saw Keanu by his motorcycle and smiled softly. So, where are you headed now? Keanu shrugged. Just following the road. She nodded. He reached into his jacket and handed her something, an envelope. She opened it and saw money inside. Keanu, I can't take this. He gave her a knowing smile. Yes, you can. Her fingers gripped the envelope tightly. What do I do now? Keanu met her gaze. Whatever you want. You're free. Keanu placed his helmet on and got on his bike. Are you going to be okay? She smiled. Yeah. Before leaving, he looked at her one last time. Be free. The wind blew, carrying with it the receipt. The one with the message. Help. Now it was no longer a cry for help. It was proof that someone had listened and made a difference. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.